Welcome to Voices in Social Work, a Carleton School of Social Work podcast. We discuss important topics in the field of social work and give you the tools to start some new conversations with those around you. We acknowledge that Carleton is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation and are exploring ways to support Indigenous communities who have suffered in order for us to be here and do what we do. Let's get started. Hi everyone, this is episode 4 of Voices in Social Work. Today I speak to Lori-Ann Macdonald, who brings a lot of experience working in short-term counseling and in shelter systems. We talk about how she processed learning about the extent of historical white supremacy in social work, why she decided to become a social worker anyways, and how she allows that history to change her work with clients and colleagues. I think this is a great episode, both for people who have worked hard to understand their privilege and the power dynamics in social work, and also for people who are just starting that journey. So let's get to the conversation. Well, okay. Thank you for being here to talk with me today. I really appreciate it.
For sure. I'm happy to be here.
Before we kind of start talking about the discussion, maybe just give a little bit of an intro about your work. It can be your job right now, past work, whatever you want.
Sure. So I'm Lori-Ann, whichever works for folks. I always say Lori-Ann is when my mom's like upset with me. so Lori's fine. Right now I'm working mostly for myself, and that looks like just crisis counseling, well, short-term counseling, I'll say. In the past, I've worked mostly with women, surviving abuse of various types. That looked like, shelter work or, counseling. That's kind of what got me into social work, actually. And I've kind of veered off a little bit into like other interests. So that's pretty much what I'm doing right now. That keeps me busy.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so welcome all the listeners. Today we're going to talk about, I haven't quite thought of the title yet, so hopefully when you're listening to this episode, there's gonna be some sort of catchy title at the beginning. But essentially, we're gonna be talking about historical white supremacy in social work and then how that affects the way we do work today. I think for me, I kind of figured out as well that in school, I figured out, there's kind of an extra layer when you're part of a community that has possibly experienced oppression from the social work field or from in other ways in this country. And I know in school, I think most of the research and conversations we had about privilege were told from a white perspective. So I think about halfway through my social work degree, I kind of realized, I need to look for other avenues of learning if I want the same level of education and understanding about my privilege or how my position as a social worker is going to impact people. So I'm really interested in talking about this, and I'm happy that maybe you can speak to that a little. And even though we don't have the same position in society, but I think I'm still interested. And then also I know other people will be interested as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm excited to have this conversation. I liked, without exposing, but I like the layout of the questions and the different parts of my brain that kind of lit up when I was like, haven't thought about that in a while. So it was I like the range of questions. Yeah.
Just before we start as well, I wanted to give a little bit of a quick introduction or explanation, because I think there are some people listening who either don't know that much about social work or haven't really had much social work education, even people who are social workers or social work students, but are still kind of trying to wrap their heads around white supremacy as a part of social work. So I'll say, welcome to social work. You're probably going to hear about this a lot more. It's okay to have questions. I still have questions too sometimes. The main thing is it's important to recognize that just because you don't have answers right now doesn't mean they don't exist. So I'd suggest doing as much research as you can before you ask somebody to explain it to you, because there is a history of marginalized communities being oppressed and then told that it's not real or it's all in their heads and they have to explain it. So it's good to not contribute to that problem and kind of get your own answers first. You can just use the internet. I found a lot of stuff on there when I was doing some research. So that's a good place to start. You can just Google white supremacy, social work, Canada. It'll come up.
A lot will come up.
I just Googled that, and actually there's some good stuff that came up, although
Yeah.
I didn't click on everything, but looks like some interesting things that will give you a good starting point. Maybe a good rule of thumb is before I ask somebody a question about their race or culture or background, I try to stop and think, oh, can I get the answer by myself first? And then if I can, I'll often choose to kind of let the conversation go somewhere else, and then I can come back to it later once I do my own research. So just a suggestion for people out there that are a little bit new to this. Okay, so I know not everybody comes to social work the same way, but I know you and we talked a little bit before this about how we wanted to help people when we came to this profession, but then there was like a moment where we learned about all the different ways that social workers have been complicit in oppression or contributed to it. So maybe you can talk a little bit about your experience about learning all those things, and then some of your initial thoughts and reactions.
Sure. So I was thinking about this and like the dates and timelines and everything, and I realized how long I've been like it doesn't seem that long, but when you look at the numbers, it's been a while. So I was in my SSW program back in Toronto. And that was around like 2014, 2015, towards the end of the program. The specific campus that I was at, they started kind of talking about the blanket ceremonies and kind of exposing my cohort to the historical part of what social work looked like. And for me, that was always kind of like, it felt backwards. I'm like, we're at the end. Why are you kind of now just touching on like that piece of it? For me, it was kind of twofold because yes, you got the experiential learning of it, having gone through like the blanket ceremonies and seeing what actually happened, but also having those in-class conversations about what social work was intended to look like and then what they actually ended up doing. Yeah, having that conversation, but then in hindsight, looking back now, I related to it more than I realized in terms of being from an island where the people that I grew up around, the people like my people, we were stolen from somewhere else and taken to another place. So like it's that same idea of someone coming and invading the land that I was originally from and kind of displacing me. So like there's that disconnect for me in terms of not really sure where my actual family origin is from. Like, are we actually from this island or were we somewhere else? So like that conversation kind of flows through life for me. But like in relation to this, some people ended up leaving the program because they started learning these things. For me, it was I could do good here. Like yes, it was it was something that disappointment, but also I wasn't surprised because of my own history. I was like, okay, that makes sense. Like this kind of paints that picture of why things look how they look now and why certain words are used and why certain conversations happen in the classroom, outside the classroom in general, and why certain agencies feel a bit more oppressive than others. Yes, the history, but I feel like it's what you do with what you know that kind of changes how you survive in it. And for me, that was kind of the change of perspective as a Black woman. Like I could have chosen to walk away and say, this is a messy space. I don't want to stay in here and I don't want to, add to the mess, because that was also a part of it that I struggled with, like, am I perpetuating the same history that people have, gone through? And I think the more I stayed in and then moving to Ottawa and, going into my actual undergrad, I realized that there was more that I could do and do it differently. So creating my own mosaic of, doing social work, for lack of a better word. Yeah.
Yeah, there are people in this field trying to carve out that space to kind of change things, right? But you do have to kind of hunt a little bit further. You have to go a little bit further into the field to find it.
Exactly. And that's what it is, right? So it's like the initial stages, I kind of look at it as, well, one prof that I had back when I was in my SSW program, he was my sociology prof, and he made it very clear. He's like, if you're in this field for money, you're in the wrong field. So we lost a couple people there. And then when we started doing like history of social work, history of like all those historical like intro courses, there are some white people in the classes that, they didn't necessarily have the most comfortable introduction, because, like having those hard conversations about like white privilege and, unpacking their own biases, and like those conversations were hard for them. But also not just them, like there were parts where I kind of had to, like, I realized like I do have some privilege of being like an immigrant woman here. I had to like sit with myself and be like, as an immigrant woman here, like I have more privilege than a lot of our indigenous folks, and like it's sitting with that and then deciding for myself, like, what am I going to do with this privilege that I have? Like, am I going to disregard it as something important, or am I going to use it to try to better the society that we live in, better the, just life in general towards that issue that exists that a lot of us like to pretend don't exist.
That's definitely like the way I look at my own privilege a little bit as well, where I'm starting to realize I didn't choose it necessarily. And it's a little bit of a waste, I think, to feel guilty about it because it's something that I can use.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And for me, it's kind of like a motivating factor to kind of not necessarily stick to the basic parts of social work that we learn in school, or that we're taught through different professional development courses or anything. For me, that's where like that whole intersection piece comes in, because I'm like, I have my own experiences that I can bring to the table. I have my own lived experiences versus schooling experiences that I can spin and help my clients or whoever I'm working with, or whoever I encounter on a daily basis, to like understand the world that we live in and just help them to hopefully, achieve something better, depending on what the scenario is. But like it's me being able to give of myself in a way that they'll understand, as opposed to, kind of just spitting clinical jargon at them.
So maybe on that same line, is there anything that you've learned in school or professional training that maybe you've either modified or even disregarded because of the potential for it to be harmful? And I'm guessing it would be I guess it would be also depending on who your clients are.
Right. I think because most of my clients have been more abused women, and women working in, like me working in nonprofit sector, but also youth. So it's using less, for me, it's mostly, being relatable, coming down off the being very formal and being very, clinical with my words, as I said before, but also getting to their level and understanding where they're at. And that's like one of the things that we like to throw around in social work, is like, meet your client where they're at, but actually do it. It's whether you're driving to like a park to go have a meeting with them because that's where they feel comfortable, or trying to break down an abuse cycle, but using like more real life examples versus what a textbook would say. So it's like, depending on what the scenario is, like I tend to be more flexible, and I prefer it that way. I prefer the less formal, stuffy feel, and I've gotten, some conversations around that, but for me, I'm like, I'm here for my clients, not necessarily the other side, right? So it's doing things to make sure they're comfortable and that they are able to get what they need from the resources that I'm trying to provide. For the most part, it's relating to them in that way. And if that's how they want to approach a situation, then that's how I'm going to show up for them, right?
Can you just clarify a little bit
Mhm.
what you mean by maybe like the more formal way, and then why you think maybe it doesn't work as well in
I
certain
don't, so
scenarios?
for me, yeah, sure. So I wouldn't say that it doesn't work. I think there are spaces where it needs to happen, but I think the places that I've chosen to work, or being formal, would come across as, you know, oh, this person thinks they're, a little bit more well-to-do, or, so it's kind of like trying to take off like any type of perceived oppression that you're kind of putting towards your client. I think from how I see it is like that freedom piece. Like I think the spaces I work in, like I have a little bit more freedom to bring different things into the conversation as opposed to, I'm assuming, in a hospital or something where you kind of have to follow specific guidelines or specific programming questions, or yeah, it's how the job is set up, I would say.
Yeah,
So
so I guess to maybe to clarify a little for people listening as well, it's like more about in certain workplaces, they have
mhm.
policy, like where social workers
Right,
work, they have policies, and
right,
sometimes those policies are kind of made with a certain type of client in mind, possibly
right,
like a white client, for example.
right.
So then when somebody comes in and kind of doesn't really
Fit that mold.
yeah, then there can be a
Right.
lot of pushback, or
Hmm.
there's can be like a push from a social worker to like try to fit into
Hmm.
the box that their workplace has created so that they can
Right.
do their job a little bit more easily.
Right. And then even on the flip side, you'd have the social workers that would, and I sometimes find myself falling into that category of, this person doesn't match, our typical clients. So how can we help this person with their unique set of situations? Right. Short example. I've worked in a shelter that, because of the location, our primary clients are, Caucasian women. We had a family come in that was, I would say, 99% Black. Um, and just the resources that she's used to living with wasn't what we had on hand at the shelter. So even something as simple as like fooding, food or clothing or hair care products, like simple, things that we would consider basic needs that would automatically be, given to a woman that comes in. For her, it was, oh, I can't eat that, or I don't eat that because of, beliefs or just dietary preferences. So that created like a little friction for some other staff because they're used to things just moving a little simpler. And for me, it was, no, like, we have someone here who's not like the others. So how are we going to handle this? Right. So it's kind of having those conversations. And for me, it was taking some of my hair care products and bringing for her and her daughter because I have what she uses. And that was something that I was able to do and I didn't mind doing it. But then on the flip side, having that conversation of like, are we actually being accessible to everyone that could potentially walk through these doors? Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Hmm.
Yeah.
I'm sure you probably come across clients that have direct experience, maybe past experience with the social work profession or other
Hmm.
social workers in the past, and they felt like they haven't been treated well. Does your approach change with them at all?
I want to say no, but to an extent it does. Just like knowing their history, or them sharing that blatantly sometimes, like, I don't like social workers, I don't trust you guys. And for me, it's like, I get it, kind of trying to understand their story, understanding, like the history of what they've gone through. And for me, it kind of creates that empathy piece of like trying to, navigate this new, because whatever situation I'm walking into with them is a new beginning. That's how I kind of phrase it to them. And the situation I'm thinking of is with youth, when I worked in a group home setting. So it was kind of different, in the sense that I wasn't the only staff they were used to, but I was new to them. So they had a general perspective on like all social workers. And for me, it was kind of not necessarily proving that I was different, but being honest with them. I'm like, we all have different approaches, we all have different styles. Some are a little more strict, some are a little more, relaxed. For me, it's finding something to connect with them on and then using that as like a stepping stone to build a rapport with them. And that, for me, that kind of helped. It didn't fully take away his lack of trust, which is normal, but it kind of helped us to say, okay, this is our middle ground. Can we get the things that you need to, accomplish done from this point on, because we have an understanding of each other. Like, something as simple as another social worker would be upset with him if he left without saying, I'm going out. So having him say, okay, can you agree to at least knock on the door? If you don't want to talk to me, that's fine. Knock on the door, just, some indication that you're heading out, creating like those little steps. And everyone's life is different. And I kind of approach it in the sense that I've never lived their lives. So for me, it's trying to understand what's easiest for them, but also following the rules, that's dictate, as you said, policies, right? That's dictated by the agency that I'm working in. So it's working with the kids or, whoever I'm working with to find something that works for both of us. So like I'm able to tick the boxes I need to tick, but also you feel like you still have autonomy over your life.
You made it a little bit easier for yourself also to not react poorly, and then
Mm-hmm.
also gave him a little bit more autonomy.
Yeah. Yeah. That, so even like those baby steps and like doing that for a while helped. So then he started trusting me, a little bit more. Like we would be able to sit down and have conversations. Wasn't perfect, still wasn't perfect because, teenage boys are teenage boys. But he was able to, sit down and have certain conversations with me. And then I got more insight into his life and I was able to understand him more. And then like things that you've read in their charts started making more sense. So I think for me, that's my approach. And I'm sure a lot of other people would have, varying approaches as well, which is good. And I think that's also one of the upsides to social work. Everyone comes at it differently. So we all have our different perspectives on it and different expectations as well. So
How did you develop your approach? Is it kind of just, was it a
um,
lot of trial and error, or did you find other learning?
I
Because
think I think it's no, I get what you're asking. I think it's for me it was learning from people older than myself, but also reading a lot and just being in scenarios, learning from people who are more versed in the field, but also in the specific jobs that I would do, and kind of observing and it's like, okay, I could do that, and then kind of like forming my own little mishmashed version of this is how I social work. Yeah. And I believe me, as much as I I know there's so much more that I could learn. So I think that's also one important piece of social work. Like it's a continuous learning profession. It's one of the things that I my evergreen thought about it always changing and looking different, and depending on society it will look different, depending on the group that you work with it will look different. So yeah, I think that's why I kind of like that phrasing, evergreen.
evergreen as in, like,
It's not just so even taking like the history of social work, right? So even that in itself, compared to now, I think there's been a lot of changes that has happened, but also a lot has stayed the same. And I think the society that we live in now, the social workers that exist now, I think we're all in our own different ways fighting to change that narrative of this is how it was, so it has to stay that way, as opposed to we're not working with the same clients that existed back then, or like what I mean, like it's different now, so the work that we're doing has to look different.
I think for me, the struggle's always just been, what am I going to do differently? Because
Mm-hmm.
you can learn, like, you can kind of learn and look back and say, oh, this,
Mm-hmm.
they shouldn't have made that choice.
Right.
But it's
Like
hard,
as in
like
the
when,
client
like
or
social
social work.
workers in the
Okay.
past, or the social work
Mm-hmm.
profession in the past, you can look back and say, oh, that was such a wrong choice that they made.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's hard to kind of look at your own work and say, okay, how am I not going to do that in the future? Because they thought they were
Right.
doing the right thing too.
Right. Right. I get that. So I think if if 2021 taught us anything, it's that whole impact over intention piece, or intention over impact, whichever direction the actual phrasing goes. For me, it would be, talking to my clients and, realizing if I overstepped, like be okay with apologizing, being okay with having those real conversations. And I think social work in Canada in general hopefully gets to that place of, not just doing statements, but actually saying, we were wrong in how we started this. We should change it. Let's continue working towards changing it and not just giving, the blanket statements that we do sometimes. Because I think that would also help with younger social workers coming into it, seeing that, like, yes, there were some spots where we were wrong in how we did this, but the intentional efforts being made to change it, make it better, make it more digestible for the clients who might be very anti, getting involved with a social worker.
I wanted to ask about if you have any advice as well for me or for other people listening
Mhm.
too. Because again, like I was saying, it's one thing to like become aware of your privilege or like a power position, especially if you're working with a client. And then it's something else to figure out how that's going to change the way you work.
Yeah.
What are some steps that people can take to ensure that they're, I guess, quote unquote, on the right side of history? So
Mm-hmm.
that they're not unknowingly complicit in oppression.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Um, Firstly, I would say, do your own work beforehand, as in work on your own personal stuff, because I think there's a very thin line sometimes between being passionate about something and then that passion kind of pushing your agenda and how you do things. So being self-aware to the point, like you're aware of what pushes you, what motivates you, what could potentially cause you to cross a line. So like having that awareness, I think would prevent you from, going too close to those lines
I think I
because,
know for me, sometimes when I'm really passionate about things, it's
yeah,
I quickly cross over into I want to control everything about
exactly. So
it.
like advocate mode kicks in and you're like, no, like I have to do this. I have to get this done. So like that piece, when I started even just applications for everything, there's one of my profs made it very clear to us. He's like, if you're not in therapy and you're doing this work, you're going to burn out. And therapy looks different for everyone, whether that's talking to someone, whatever works for you, but some form of intentional self-care and a space that you can vent to, or a safe space. Very very important, safe spaces, because we see a lot of crazy things in this field. So it's how do you take care of yourself afterwards? Like that's what continues that the longevity in this field, I think. But also being able to turn off that part of your mind, which I think a lot of us struggle with because life, especially, like with COVID now, like everything's, you're either at home working or work is with you wherever you are. So
I
it's,
see the same thing all the time, right? So it's hard
mhm,
to get your mind to switch when your body's in the same place, looking at the
exactly.
same things.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's all those, considering all those things. Um, but practically, so yeah, practically I would say, doing your inner work, but also not just surrounding yourself with your own community, but also like learning about other people, like especially the agencies that you work in, becoming aware of the different groups that use the resources of those agencies or the different clienteles, like so you're not just walking in blind to say, this is what I learned in school, these are my perfect clients that are going to show up, because those don't exist, and just pulling from textbook to real life, that never, like 90% of the time, never works. So it's kind of learning how to be flexible sometimes and learning how to match a situation with an idea that you have in terms of an approach to a situation. So like, yes, you could have like read a chapter in a book and it says do XYZ, but the situation doesn't call for all of XYZ. So maybe it's like an expanded version of point X. So it's like allowing yourself that space to get creative with it.
And
I
thankfully, there
think,
is a lot of research that
yeah.
anyway, there is a lot of research about people like um, reevaluating the way
Mm-hmm.
that they do things or people trying to make this choice and then writing about how it went. So that's
Exactly.
helpful too.
Exactly. And that's, yeah, that's a big part of it for sure. I think it helps with, especially when you look at like if you do like a comparison, like a historical comparison from 19 something to like 2000 something, like you'll see there are some things I think would be still parallel, but like you'll see the differences in how folks approach things. And for me, it's like having more than one way to do one thing is never a bad thing. There's because people are so different, right? And we are literally working with humans. So it's maybe that approach works for one person and the other one doesn't, or vice versa, or a combination of both approaches works. You know what I mean? So it's not necessarily getting stuck on this is the one area or the one path to, progress for this person. It's allowing yourself to try different things. And I think that's a really big part of social work. It's doing what works for the clients in front of you, getting to know them enough where you have an idea of like, okay, maybe this will work for you, but this would work for like a Susie, or, like it won't work for Tiffany, but it'll work for, so it's like having that ability to not just say, okay, this is my agenda for the day. These are all the things that we're going to use on everyone else around us. But you might get a client who nothing works for. So then you have to go back to the drawing book and say, what are we doing?
There's no like
And
formula to learn how to connect with someone.
no, no. That funny enough, the first job I had out of school was working in an autistic group home. And it was not my first time working with autistic people, but it was my first like one-on-one for like prolonged hours. I remember like going and it's like, oh, I got this. I know how to do this. I've done this before. Nope. Nope. That was like a big like eye-opening. I was like you have the theory, but theory means nothing when the person in front of you is yelling at you because they want a magazine and you don't have magazines, and you're like, there's literally nothing in a book that can help you to figure that scenario out. It's literally getting to know the person in front of you and working with the person in front of you.
Yeah, and it takes knowing yourself too, right? You're saying like doing
Yeah.
your own research, learning about your own background or your own culture, the way you see the world and how it might differ from somebody else.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Because then you're able to, in the moment, like put aside any feeling
exactly.
like, oh, this person isn't being what I want them to be.
Exactly. And even that scenario, like I could have walked into that and said, oh, she's being rude because she's yelling at me. And I've seen staff do that or take that approach, whereas I would be like, person A, what's going on? Why are we yelling? Like what's going on? To like, bring the inside voice out and, kind of walk her down. And everyone always is like, it's your calm demeanor. I'm like, probably, but I'm not always calm. But like in certain settings, that's what you're going to get, because everyone's up here and I'm down here. And I'm like, you need to match me. So then we can actually have a conversation, right? So it's knowing enough of you and how you influence like the environment you're in. So yeah. I'm trying to think of like other practical things that I've done or seen done. Definitely professional development. Definitely. Find the things that you're interested in, learn them, practice them.
Professional development as in like seeking out new
like
techniques
workshops.
research.
Yeah, workshops, reading articles. I have so many books on things that I'm interested in. I'm staring at them and I'm like, it would be nice to, just have like a month to just sit and read. But that doesn't exist, right?
Yeah.
but yeah, so it's like, for me, it's I have a lot of trauma books because I work in like a lot of trauma settings. So it's like, constantly being on top of different approaches, different things people have, kind of discovered. And, just again, like it depends on what you work in and where your interests lie. But yeah, I think those are some of the go-to things I would kind of suggest to folks kind of venturing into this crazy field that we work in. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I mean, it's a little bit of trial and error sometimes
Oh
too,
yeah.
right? With situations like
Oh
that
yeah.
you can't plan for.
Oh
So,
yeah. Oh yeah. I've had days where I go into work with an agenda. It's like, okay, we're gonna talk to this person, do my rounds. And this was like when I was at the shelter, one of the shelters, do your rounds, check on everyone. And you go in, half the people you plan to talk to aren't there because they've left for various reasons. So now there's a gap in your schedule, and you're like, okay, we can do something else. So it depends. And also, it again, my mind just wandered over to like my first placement, which was at a long-term care house, a long-term care home, sorry. And there was a client who I got really close to, like in terms of, she I was able to connect with her really well. And I learned a lot from her. And just like she was one of the people who I was able to, practice some of my skills that I was building. And one weekend I left and I came back and she just wasn't there anymore. So like, like it brings out a different part of you depending on the setting you work in. Like there are different parts of you that you will have to work on. For me, that taught me is like I can't work in long-term care at all. Can't work with babies. Anything in the middle, perfect. Those two extremes, can't do it because it brings out all the emotions and all the feelings. And it's like, now I know. So even that in itself, it's, one of the things I would say, figure out what your clientele is, figure out the group that you're comfortable with, um, and go from there. Yeah.
it's good to find like where you can do your best work, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
For sure.
Is there anything that you'd suggest for people to help encourage other people around them to also keep challenging themselves and
Mm-hmm.
keep trying to see other people's perspectives?
I'm always for, uncomfortable conversations. I'm also really big on honest conversations. Um, but also I think that like the places I've worked allowed that to happen. They're more, as I said, more relaxed. It's more of a group approach to whatever the overall goal is. So having like those conversations during staff meetings or being able to, go to, let's say, my shelter manager and kind of highlight like this is happening. We need to like do a workshop on this. Something that I've done in the past where I've observed something or like a trend that's happening around staff and like clientels in the shelter or wherever. And I would maybe, find like a workshop or a training. It's like we should do this as a group, without highlighting specifically, what I'm seeing. I was like, could we do this? Is this something that we can kind of fit into a staff meeting? And I'm sure like there are different approaches to even having that conversation. And depending on where you work, like it will be different. Like a lot of places are either really open to those conversations or they're very like hush hush about because
Like one or the other.
yeah, so it's literally and I've worked in both settings, so it's always interesting when I have to like kind of step back and it's like what is the setup of this place that I'm in now. The one that I'm thinking of, it was very open door, open conversation, say it as it is, so we would always have like really blunt conversations with each other. So it was easier to be like, for example, the example that you said about like necessarily challenging someone's perspective on something, like those conversations have come up before where I've heard a staff member say, like, I hear what you're saying, but if you look at it from this perspective, this person might feel like you're kind of, trying to rule them or oppress them or whatever the language was. But sitting there and watching that happen, I was like, so it is doable. You just have to, the people that you work with, you all have, I feel like you have to have a collective agreement that the words being said aren't to kind of dig at you as a person. It's just maybe there's other ways that you could do this or give it a try, or, so it's, and I think that group that we had, everyone was very, aware of themselves and honest with each other. So it worked. It was more collaborative. It was more, it felt more family as opposed to I'm just showing up to work to get paid, you know. And I've also been in that situation where having those conversations like pulling teeth. So it's, yeah, I think I would say kind of watch the space and try to understand the workplace culture and see how to approach it. But I do think having those conversations is important. And I think for me personally, that would be the best way I would approach it.
Still worth it to do something, even if it's a
Yeah.
hard workplace to do it in.
Oh, yeah. 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 Whether it's, like individual, like you go talk to the actual person, or you talk to the person with your ED present. So it's not, like for safety reasons also, because, things get said, things get misinterpreted. So it's always, important to have, or HR, whoever, whatever your agency setup is. And it helps you to be more comfortable in that setting as well. You have to be there so it makes sense that you're comfortable where you are, so that you can, do that job well. Because at the end of the day, we're all looking out for our clients, and we're all, that's the goal, right? So we would assume and hope that everyone else also has that same goal in mind. So yeah.
Is there any like final thing you want to say, or any, you can have the final word, final advice?
I think my final thought would be, social work is an amazing field to be in. We need more social workers. We need more POC social workers. And I'm being biased because I live in Ottawa. It's a fact. There's a huge immigrant population here. We have a lot of refugee clients here. And just on a relatability level, clients talk to who they see, talk to who they can relate to. Not saying you can't relate to, white folks, but
easier.
There's that, there's that commonalities, that you understand my life. You've been through what I've been through.
There's already like a layer of ice that you don't have to break through, kind of.
Exactly. Right? Exactly. It's like finding a therapist that looks like you, having a reaction to something and the therapist not understanding why you're reacting the way you're reacting. Then you in turn have to start explaining to the therapist. Like it's a cycle that no one who's seeking support should have to go through, so it's that I would say, if you're looking for a new career, come join us. You're always welcome. So yeah.
Yes, like even though there's a lot of potential to do harm, there's always going to be people like this. I don't think the position's going anywhere. So there's always going to be people doing this
trying
job.
To fill it.
So
yeah.
Hopefully then those of us that are trying to do it can do it in a better way.
Exactly. Yeah. I like that you said that, but also that was one of the reasons why I got into working with abused women. I'm like, I want to work here until it's no longer needed. That's one of my motivation factors. It's like, I will keep doing this until no one needs to do this, because abusers will have realized that that's not the way to handle their issues. Yeah,
that's one thing. Like there's that's one thing about this profession too, right? Where sometimes the social work profession falls into the trap of trying to perpetuate itself or ensure that there's still a need, that we still have jobs.
Oh yeah. There's definitely that side of it. Yeah, I've definitely seen that side of it. When in fact, I think all of us should be working. I had an older prof, so she's, I'm trying to work myself out of a job. I'm like, I get it. So yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem. This was exciting. I hope everyone got something from it.
Thank you for listening to Voices in Social Work. We hope you now have something new to talk about or explore. If you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, please email us at sswpodcast@carleton.ca. You can also visit voicesinsocialwork.podbean.com to see our full list of episodes and links to all of the ways you can listen to us. See you next time.